After the third round of Norway Chess, the players had a rest day and they were taken to a local farm where they drove tractors and milked cows. Well, it seems like the experience left them thoroughly refreshed because round 4 of Norway Chess was extraordinary. I could have picked any of the 5 games to analyse, but I've chosen as my main game Levon Aronian against Magnus Carlsen. These two players often produce really interesting games. I think they bring out the best in each other. So here we go. It's a Slav. I'm going to zip through these first few moves very quickly. And this position has been seen quite a few times before. And here, well, a normal move is just to play Queen c2, but that does allow Black to liberate his position with e5. Instead, Levon played a new move here, Bishop c2, which looks really strange, very odd indeed. I think the idea is basically because after e5 there is no longer a threat of e4, and in fact in this position White has an interesting move, knight d5, giving up a piece. And getting tremendous play there. I mean, Black has ways to get around this, but I think that's the idea. But it's hard to justify this move, Bishop c2. It's also a kind of waiting move as well. After 24.5 minutes thought, Magnus played Rook d8. Well, a pretty normal move opposite the Queen. Well, if that kind of justifies Bishop c2, this novelty, because with this time control, there's no increment. So time is really precious. So, around about 25 minutes over one move is quite a serious time investment. And here Levon thought for 16 minutes and played a3. And here is where things start to hot up. The bishop can, of course, retreat, but now White is very happy because after e4, then it's clear that White has nice central control, and that bishop is looking down at h7. Okay, typical position, very pleasant for White. But of course Magnus is not the kind of guy that backs down, and that pawn can simply be taken because the bishop is guarded by the Queen. Now we see Levon's idea. He sacrificed the exchange and then closed the position with c5. This exchange sacrifice, it's a pure exchange sacrifice. There's no immediate return on material investment. But it reminds me very much of an exchange sacrifice that Levon made against Anish Giri in the Tata Steel tournament in January, where Levon won a beautiful game, beautiful long-term positional sacrifice. What's the point of this? Well, after White has played c5, then of course Black's Queen is rather locked in, has difficulties returning to safety because of course after Queen a5 it's in the line of the bishop, and knight takes d5 looks fantastic. So in order to free the Queen, Black somehow has to break open the position with either b6 or e5. Now if I play e5, we can see the danger to the Queen very clearly. So knight b1, bishop b4 is nice, that takes away this square. You can see the Queen simply can't retreat now. And now the threat, well, is to play knight here, and if Queen b2 we can catch the Queen like this, and if Queen a1 then check wins the Queen. Well, there are other variations, but the Queen drops in all of them. So that is the threat. Knight b1 is the threat. So therefore Levon played b6. Now knight b1 still looks like a very dangerous move. And after the game, Levon was discussing this with a commentator and the tournament, Nigel Short, and well, they both thought that this might have been actually the best way for White to play. So Queen c1 controls some useful squares here. Queen is running really short of squares, has to go back, and now again this discovered attack. The Queen goes here, and White wins the exchange back. Now, after all these trades, that's a nice move, bishop a5. You can see that once that dark square bishop is gone, then black is really suffering. Now, material is, let me see, what's the score? Well, after this, another discovered, material is actually even, but positionally, this is not very pleasant for black because these dark squares are very weak. That bishop is dreadful on c8. White has excellent control there. So, knight b1 looks attractive, but Levon played b4. It's funny, he's a very calm character. He's so laid back. And, you know, he's not... I suspect if he'd analysed that, he probably would have gone for it. But he was in no rush, and you know, he realised his position, it just looks very attractive. Played b4, just to hold this pawn here. Now, there are lots of possibilities for black. If pawn takes, then white can still go for this idea of trapping the queen. So Magnus played knight e4. Again, it's just creating complications in order to free the queen. So Levon took this, and now, well, that's an important central pawn to take. He's also looking here, he's also looking down here. The queen has some freedom. It's possible just to take on c5 and play rook b8. White can probably just take on c6 there, and that is a very, very nice central pawn chain. Tremendous compensation. But Magnus played rook b8. Now, the reason I'm guessing that he didn't trade on c5 was because he wants to play a5. So, for example, if bishop takes c6 here, he can play a5, and that rather undermines this pawn on c5. But instead of taking on c6, Levon now unleashed bishop takes h7 check, this classic piece sacrifice. So remember, after this, white is now a whole rook down. So let's see, knight g5. Now, Magnus went back with king g8. What happens if he steps forward? So this is a classic kind of scenario, and queen g4 is generally the standard move if the king comes up with these kind of sacrifices. Now, of course, there's a deadly discovered check threatened, so f5, the queen goes back. Once again, discovered check is threatened, so if king f6, the king steps out of the way, queen h4. So, I mean, this is such a wonderful initiative for white, and particularly when the queen is just way out in Siberia somewhere. Likewise, the rook, you know, black simply can't bring its pieces over to defend. If, for example, bishop b7, then just e4 before making a discovered check, you can bring this bishop into the game. I think objectively it should be very, very good for white. So after knight g5 check, the king stepped back to g8. Queen h5. So the classic attack. Knight has to come across to defend. Check. So it looks as though black is holding for the moment, but actually the queen sweeps across, hitting both rooks, and yeah, black is still struggling. So bishop d7 connecting them, but now the knight comes in, checks, and material is, well, I was going to say it's even, but of course white has taken a stack of pawns here. But actually, black can win this knight back with rook c8, and the queen has to move again, so it has to relinquish control of the knight, so it has to play to a7. So here, black is still a piece up. But white has, let me see, 3 pawns for the piece, and, well, these rolling centre pawns. King is also exposed. White's king looks perfect. So black under massive pressure here. after the game, Levon thought that maybe knight f6 would have been a better chance, and he thought that this endgame might have been best chance for black. But I mean, this is a fairly forcing variation. Queen here, bishop f6. So the point is that after queen takes, then queen takes bishop check. It's obviously winning for white. But here black can play, give the queen, and then, well, material is actually even, but this is such a strong piece, and you know, these pawns in combination with these pieces could start to fly down the board. Looks promising for white, but not yet winning. So Magnus played queen d3. Takes here, and now the queen came back. This queen is a very hard-working piece. So obviously, if the rook moves, then queen takes bishop. So the queen came back to defend. White takes a pawn. Bishop e8 loses straight away to queen here, and the pawn, whoops, pawn staggers through. So bishop c8 is absolutely forced. So for the moment, white's kind of rolling initiative has been halted, but he does have 4 pawns for the piece. So now just a very calm move from Levon, giving his king an escape square here, and that means that he can now try to bring the rook into the game along the third rank via e1, maybe via d1 as well. And once that rook comes into the game, things could be very good. e5 is interesting to free the bishop here, but then f4 forces this trade and this endgame with, well, yes, is it 3 pawns? Yeah, no, it's 4 pawns. It's still 4 pawns. Looks tremendous for white. Should be winning. So Magnus played in this position after h3. He brought his queen to d5. Then rook d1 to defend the d pawn. And now Magnus played e5, probably a mistake. Rook f8 looks better, so that if rook d3, then the queen starts to get a bit of counterplay. I mean, white still has tremendous chances there, but it's not as clear as the game continuation. But I think it's terribly difficult to defend this position. So e5, now the rook rocked up. And now Magnus collapsed immediately. e4 is his best chance, but, well, I mean, this is a terribly difficult position to defend. And after this, suddenly the queen comes in with the rook. Threat here. And now queen h4. And here Magnus resigned. Obviously, if the king goes back, then rook takes bishop. And that really is the end of the show. Well, just a brilliant game by Levon. And as I said, he's so calm when he gives up material. He just, you know, he loves the initiative. He also said after the game that he loves to play against Magnus because he knows that Magnus is always going to play for a win. You know, he doesn't back down. You know, he's not going to be playing for a draw, and you know that suits Levon as well. I've just got time to show you the finish of Wesley So against Sergei Karyakin, which was incredible. Karyakin has been under pressure for practically the whole game, and you can see that Wesley has rammed this pawn through to e7. Wesley's been manoeuvring for some time, and now he thought he was making the final breakthrough with g5, and now h7. So mate is threatened. If the queen steps up, then e7 is winning immediately. So black has to take on g6. Now there's a threat to blocked queen again, so black has to blockade. And now h7 check, and look, the king is completely trapped in the corner. Now, all white needs to do is bring the king in, and it is game over. But Karyakin, we know what an incredible defender he is. He found an extraordinary defense. So f5 check. I'll just run through the game continuation, but basically white can't do better than this. Excuse me, he actually took on g5. So the rook comes over. I mean, this rook would like to get down to d8, but Karyakin makes sure these pawns are taken. And now, here's the trick. I mean, there's no way out of this for white by now. Basically, there's a stalemate defense. After bishop takes, not rook takes bishop, which would allow a checkmate on the 8th rank, but instead, rook e5 check. And the king simply can't escape. If the king comes back, then the rook just keeps chasing. So after rook e5 check, Wesley realised, of course, what was happening and played king takes rook, and that is stalemate. So there we go. Karyakin was christened after his incredible defensive performance in the World Championship match in November, the Russian Minister of Defense, and he's certainly living up to his title there. An amazing defense there. Maybe Wesley could have won earlier, but g5 is a draw. I should say, I didn't have time to go through Hikaru Nakamura's game, but he won very nicely against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. Nishikori defeated Anand in a very nice game. Caruana and Kramnik drew their game. Incredibly complex encounter. So, after 4 rounds, Hikaru Nakamura has 3 points out of 4. He leads the tournament, and in second position, Levon Aronian and Vladimir Kramnik with 2.5.